Hey y'all, so today I wanted to do a video talking about books that I just couldn't put down. Recently, I've read several books that I got really engrossed in and just couldn't put down, and when I looked back on my Goodreads, I realized that I had a pretty substantial list of books that I just simply could not put down. These aren't necessarily books that are my favorite books on the planet, nor are they necessarily books that I read in a single sitting, but rather books that I either physically or mentally couldn't let go of while I was reading them. Sure, some of these books I did read in a single sitting, but the main key ingredient here is that these are books that completely engrossed me, and even when I wasn't reading, I was thinking about them. So the first books on this list are the first three books of the Twilight Saga by Stephenie Meyer. I read these three books during the fall of my freshman year of high school, which is coming up on 8 years ago now, and I want to say that I read each of these within about 3 days, so like tops 10-ish days for all three of these. I just got completely engrossed in this series and I could not put them down. And it's been several years since I've picked up one of those, so I kind of want to reread them just to see what my opinion on them is now, but probably not, because I have too many new books that I want to read. The next one on this list is an obvious one for me, which is Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I picked up Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows on the day of its release, and I read the entirety of it within about 24 hours of first starting it. I just basically sat down and I read the entire thing, only taking breaks when I was forced to by my parents. I'm pretty sure I also did the classic kid hides the book under the pillow and tries to read it after dark, but the book is giant, so it didn't really hide under my pillow very well. Next up is 13 Reasons Why by J. Asher. This is one that's been on my favorites list for a really long time, and once I picked it up, the start was just so interesting, and then once I got into it, I just couldn't put it down, and it is still one of my favorite books to this day. And pretty much every time I read it, I do end up reading it in a single sitting just because of how engrossing it is. Next up on the list is another one that is a longtime favorite, and that is City of Bones by Cassandra Clare, and pretty much the entirety of the first half of the Mortal Instrument series. I first read City of Bones, City of Ashes, and City of Glass during my senior year of high school. I picked this one up, I want to say, in January, and then I picked the other two up in February, and I think I read pretty much all of these in 1 or 2 sittings apiece. I had this weird relationship with the series where I would binge read pretty much an entire book in the series, and then I would go like several weeks without picking up the next one, even though I knew I really wanted to read it, and then I would binge read that one, and then the cycle would continue. It was really weird, but I read most of these books within 1 or 2 days or sittings, and I just got completely engrossed in this world and these characters. And I have to add one more Cassandra Clare book into the mix, and that is Clockwork Princess. Now, I was reading this as part of a reading challenge, so I was trying to read it quickly, but I picked it up one day, and I think that I meant to read part of it and then just move on and do something else with the rest of the day, but I just couldn't put the book down. I got maybe like 20 pages in and I was already hooked, and I think I just read the rest of it in a single day, in a single sitting, and I just got completely invested in trying to figure out what was going to happen at the end of that trilogy. And if y'all have read Cassandra Clare books, you know that she really knows how to end a series, and it's just mind-blowingly amazing. Next is Divergent by Veronica Roth. I'm not a big fan of the rest of this trilogy, but I picked up Divergent one night and I think I read the first like 50-ish pages, and when I picked it up the next day it started getting really, really good, and I just spent my entire afternoon reading the book. I couldn't put it down because I was just so invested in what was going on. Divergent is one of those books that I kind of want to reread at this point because I feel like I wouldn't like it as much if I read it now. But either way, the first time I read it, I gave it 10 out of 10 stars, and I was obsessed with it. So I didn't really realize this until now, but the books on this list are kind of divided between books that I read quite a while ago and books that I read within the past year, and now we're going to be kind of moving into the section of books that I've read in the past year. Starting with The Body Electric by Beth Revis. Beth Revis is one of my absolute favorite authors, and this book is pretty heavily to blame because I think I read the first maybe like 50 pages and was interested but not super engrossed, but it hit a point where I just simply couldn't put the book down. I think I binge read the rest of it, and I just sat in, I think, one sitting and just read the entirety of the rest of the book because it was just really fast-paced, really intriguing, and I just wanted to know what was going to happen. And I do have a full video review of The Body Electric if you want to check it out. I will leave it down in the description. Next is Night Film by Marisha Pessl. Now I'd have to say, out of the ones on this list, this one probably took me the longest to read. I want to say that it took me 4 or 5 days to get through this book, but it's also like a 600 something page book. I've mentioned this several times about this book, but it's just a very immersive read. Like, it sets a very specific mood and tone, and it kind of permeated my entire life. I felt very paranoid while reading this book, which is something that I don't normally feel. And I just found myself, anytime that I wasn't reading the book, thinking about reading the book. And that for me is definitely a book that I can't put down. Even when I've put it down physically, I can't put it down mentally. It's just an insanely engrossing read, both while I was reading it and while I was just going about my daily life. Next up we have The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. So I was reading this book during the Cramathon last summer, and I want to say that by the beginning of the Cramathon I was about 150 pages into the book. But then the second day of the Cramathon hit, and I think I wanted to get to about page 300 by the end of the day, and instead I got to page 300 and I couldn't put it down, so I just read the rest of the book, and the book is like 700 something pages long, so I just literally sat all day and couldn't put the book down. And I find this kind of interesting because this is actually my least favorite book in the trilogy. I mean, I gave it 9.5 stars out of 10, so I still loved it, but I gave the other 2 books 10 stars out of 10, and I didn't binge read them the same way that I binge read the third book. It didn't change my enjoyment of the book at all, but I did definitely find that I just could not put this last book in the trilogy down. And now I have another Brandon Sanderson book on the list, and that is Firefight, which is the second book in the Reckoners trilogy. This is actually my most recently completed read, and quite honestly, it took me a little while to get into this book. I was reading it on my Kindle, and I was reading it kind of slowly, and once I got to about 30%, I finally decided, okay, I just have to pick it up. I have to get to like 50% of the way through. I have to get through this book. And so I picked it up one night, I want to say it was maybe like 10:30, 11, and I started reading it with the goal of getting to 50% through. And then I got to 50% through, and I was like, you know what, I kind of want to keep on reading, let's just keep on going with this. And then I saw that part 4 of the book started at 79% of the way through, and I was like, sure, let's get to 79% of the way through and then stop for the night. And I got to part 4, and I still couldn't put it down, so I just ended up reading the last 70% of that book all in one sitting because I just simply couldn't put the book down and was so invested in it. Brandon Sanderson is just an amazing author, and all of his books so far that I've read are amazing. Next up, I have I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. I considered not including this book on this list because I read it as part of the Booktubeathon, so the goal for that week was just to read books quickly, but I found myself, specifically with this one, unable to put it down because I fell so in love with it and got so engrossed in this very beautiful and intricate story. I don't remember taking very many breaks while I was reading this. I just got completely obsessed with it and fell completely in love. This is a little bit of a surprise to me because I don't pick up contemporary a lot, but if you are a fan of contemporaries and you haven't read this book, I definitely would recommend it because it's just so engrossing and you get so invested in the characters and in this very intricate plot. Next up, I have The Chimes by Anna Smale. This is another one where I actually read it over the course of a few days, but when I wasn't reading it, I was consistently thinking about it and wanting to read it, and when I was reading it, I was flying through it and getting so engrossed and invested in this beautiful, beautiful story. I keep meaning to do a full review of this book, and I keep not doing it, but seriously guys, this book was beautiful, and I got so engrossed and invested in this world and these characters, and it was just really, really wonderful. Next up on the list is Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. Like with a couple others on this list, it took me a little while to get into this one, and I've talked about this in, I think, my March wrap-up, which I'll link down in the description. But essentially, I started reading this and I wasn't super invested until about 150 pages in. But once it hit that mark, I'm pretty sure I read the rest of the book in a single sitting. I just got so incredibly invested in these characters and this really interesting plot, and I just got so engrossed in the story that I couldn't bring myself to put it down, and I think I was up until like 4 or 5 in the morning reading this book, but it was worth it. And finally, the last book on this list is another one that I've read very recently and got incredibly engrossed in, and that was Don't Look Back by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I had heard that Jennifer L. Armentrout's books were really addicting, but this was the first one that I had read by her, and I just got completely drawn in to everything that was going on. I think my plan for the first night that I picked it up was to read to like page 50 and then to go to sleep, and that didn't happen. I ended up getting about halfway through the book by the time I went to sleep, and at that point it was again 4 or 5 in the morning, and I had like 2 presentations the next day, so I should have put it down several hours before I did, but I didn't. And then the next day, at pretty much the first chance that I got, I sat down and I finished the rest of the book because I was just so invested in it, and I had been thinking about it the entire time that day that I hadn't been able to read it. It was just incredibly engrossing, and I got so invested in what was going on. So that's it for my list of books that I couldn't put down. If you've read any of these books, let me know down in the comments what you thought of them, and also let me know down in the comments what some of your books were that you just couldn't put down. I'd love to know. As always, I will leave links down in the description to my blog, Twitter, and Goodreads. Please add me as a friend on Goodreads. I would love to be friends with all of you. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching. Bye! I read these 3 books in the fall of my freshman year of high school, which is coming up on 7 years ago now. No, 8 years ago.